Good morning, Mr. Silega. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Yes, I got your message that Mr. Singh's counsel indicated that they might be a few minutes late.
Yes.
But I see that it's 16 minutes past 10 and they are still not here.
They are still not here, Chairperson. I have phoned the advocate again, and she indicated to me that they're running 10 to 15 minutes late because they needed to commission an affidavit of Mr. Singh. So it's a further affidavit, apparently, which they would like to hand up this morning. And that will take us to beyond 10:30 by the look of things.
Any affidavit they have for this morning obviously won't be used this morning.
Correct.
And it could have been dealt with later. So it's really, it wasn't a few minutes.
No, it's more than a few minutes.
Yeah. So the further 15 minutes or so was from what time? When you called them and they
From
said
just
that?
2
minutes ago.
Just 2 minutes before the
So that will take us
chairperson
beyond
started.
1:30.
But she says she's apologizing profusely.
Yeah, that is quite late. I'm going to adjourn. It's just a pity that we are losing a whole 8 minutes. I'll adjourn again and come back at 1:30.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. I see that Mr. Singh and his counsel are still not here.
They are not, Chair, but the attorney is here.
Yeah, this is unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable. The Commission doesn't have time. We're working into the evenings, we're working weekends to try and make sure we can finish time. We can't afford to lose time like this. I'm going to adjourn. I hope that whatever affidavit they prepared, going to adjourn until 11:30. I would like you to get a chance to read whatever affidavit they've prepared, so that if possible, that can be used today as well, because we are losing time.
Yes.
I'm going to adjourn and we'll return at 11:30.
Thank you.
We adjourn. see counsel for Mr. Singh, and Mr. Singh are here now.
Yes.
Yes. I'm sure counsel for Mr. Singh would like to say something.
Yes, good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning.
First of all, we want to apologize for being late this morning. Unfortunately, as it goes with these things, we had a few challenges, some of them personal, others just running late. So we apologize for not being here on time.
No, that's fine. You have given me a full explanation in chambers.
Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, all right. Let's start then. And let's try and increase the pace.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Indeed.
Okay, all right. Please administer the oath of affirmation to Mr. Singh again.
Please state your full names for the record.
Anoj Singh.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I do not.
Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Chairperson, before Mr. Seleka starts,
Yes.
based on the questions that was asked on the last occasion, we prepared an affidavit for Mr. Singh. We believe that it's in the interest of this commission that Mr. Singh start with some of those issues. I think having regard to where we were on the last occasion, it would give you and the commission clarity on some important issues. So we beg leave for Mr. Singh to first deal with the issues that's in the affidavit before Mr. Pule continues leading his evidence.
Mr. Selega will see whether it accords with his plan to do so. But of course, if there were things that needed clarification last time, at some stage or another, the clarification should be given.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to look at the affidavit?
Yes, during the adjournment, I did glance through the affidavit. The affidavit itself is fairly short, it's 8 pages long, but the annexures are quite voluminous.
You haven't had a chance to look at the annexures,
Not all of
or
them.
some of them.
I looked at 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah.
But I've seen the contents of the affidavit. What I could do for Mr. Singh is I could ask you some of the questions which I intended asking Mr. Singh this morning, bear on the issues that he seeks to address in the affidavit. So I could follow my line, and then in the course of him answering, he could refer the chairperson to that affidavit, to the extent that he wants to answer some of the questions.
Well,
And I know the chairperson hasn't seen the affidavit.
yeah,
Yes.
you sent me just the affidavit on WhatsApp, and I had a superficial look. So I think that the important thing is whether it's going to be fruitful to ask him questions on these matters before you have read the annexures. If it will be manageable, that's fine. But I haven't read I've seen some parts of the affidavit. I haven't read it.
Yeah.
So of course you could continue on the way you had planned. And if Mr. Singh, in responding to those questions, uses information that's in the affidavit, that's fine. And but later on, when you have had a chance to look at the annexures and everything,
Yes.
and when I have had that chance, we might revisit the issues.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So I think let's carry on that basis.
Yes. Mr. Singh, you understand. So we carry on the basis that I have prepared, insofar as you need to refer to this new affidavit. Yeah.
I think when he answers, he can answer using the information that's in the affidavit.
Yes.
But since we haven't had
Yes.
read it, there might be difficulties if he's going to refer in detail to annexures. So maybe he can use the knowledge that he has and say that some of the things are dealt with in certain annexures. At a later stage, when we have all had a chance to read the affidavit and annexures, we can go back and then he can supplement his answers by referring in detail, if he wishes to the annexures.
Yes, Chair. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, you follow that, Mr. Singh. Chairperson, the affidavits of Mr. Singh are found, well, the ones which are already in the bundle are found in Eskom Bundle 16.
I've got bundle 16.
Eskom Bundle 16. But the bundle, Chair, which I wish us to focus on as we proceed now is Eskom Bundle 14 bracket C. Eskom Bundle 14 bracket C, and from time to time I will refer to the relevant passages.
I don't want to forget this, Mr. Seleka.
Yes.
It relates to Eskom, but not to Mr. Singh. I wanted to look for something in Mr. Marukane's affidavit over the weekend. I could only see the supplementary affidavit or second, not the first. Apparently, when my registrar mentioned the name to you, you could not remember.
Yes.
But maybe I didn't pronounce it correctly when I spoke to her, but I thought I had, because I subsequently checked the spelling, and I thought I got it right.
Oh, okay.
You know which affidavit I'm talking about?
Yes, if it is then Marukane, Chair, I know.
Yes, well,
Yes.
I don't know his first name, I just know the surname.
Yes.
So if you can indicate to her where she will find that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, right.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, just by way of recapping on this, we were mainly dealing with the McKinsey matters last time when we adjourned. We dealt with the corporate plan and we started with the MSA. And on the corporate plan, it was a debate, in inverted commas, about who rendered services. And we were trying to inquire as to who rendered services. And in regard to we had gone beyond that inquiry about who rendered services. And on the MSA, we were dealing with the conclusion thereof. Now, I just want to quickly finish off by reference to the affidavits of Dr. Weiss and Dr. Amankwa on the services or the identity of the entities which rendered services in respect of the corporate plan. And I'm going to simply refer you to the paragraphs without too much time being taken on that. So that's Eskom Bundle 14, Chairperson. Mr. Singh, I will start firstly with the affidavit of Dr. Weiss. And I will read from paragraph 38. Oh,
Appreciate
page 692. 692, yes.
Black numbers, correct?
The black numbers as usual.
Six.
692. You are the,
Paragraph 38.
yeah. So you will see the heading there above paragraph 37. It says introduction of regiments / trillion at Eskom and subsequent dealings with regiments trillion. And then the subheading is introduction of regiments at Eskom. Then paragraph 38 says, as discussed above, when Mr. Molefe and Mr. Singh transitioned from Transnet to Eskom in mid-2015, regiments worked with McKinsey on a 2-month project that arose out of the CEO and CFO onboarding. I understand that regiments was an established firm and had relevant expertise on the financial and balance sheet aspects of the project, and thus well equipped to lead the portion of the project. I was aware of the project, but had limited personal involvement in it, and thus limited interaction with regiments at that time. Then under paragraph 39, you have a heading where he says mid-2015 work with regiments at Eskom. And then paragraph 40 reads, McKinsey presented the model developed during the 2-month project to Mr. Singh around August 2015, and was asked to support Eskom in writing its annual corporate plan based on the model. Though McKinsey had not previously been engaged to provide support to Eskom in writing this annual submission, I believe the model was representative of the extensive institutional knowledge we had of Eskom, and that Mr. Singh recognized the importance of such existing knowledge during a period of great challenges for Eskom when a sound corporate plan was urgently needed. Then he says in paragraph 41, we wrote a proposal, and the letter of acceptance we received from Eskom specified McKinsey was required to engage an SD&L partner. Given regiment's financial modeling capabilities and work on the previous projects, which formed the basis of the corporate plan, we envisaged regiments as the SD&L partner for the corporate plan project. In paragraph 42, he then says, as explained further below, in October or November 2015, we learned that a regiment partner with whom we had worked on the 2-month project was planning to a spin-off of the management consulting arm of regiments, which would ultimately result in the creation of an entity called Trillion Management Consulting. We did not have a formal subcontracting agreement for the corporate plan, but we worked alongside regiments / Trillion, who provided financial component of the modeling required for the corporate plan. You see that, Mr. Singh?
Yes, sir.
Now, the dates of October and November 2015 are significant in regard to a partner of regiments going to form a company called Trillion Management Consulting, because he comes back to that in paragraph 45. And you will see that, as he says, as discussed above, around October or November 2015, we learned that a regiment's partner, Dr. Eric Wood, was in the process of buying out the management consulting arm of regiments from his business partners, and would spin it off into Trillion. At that time, Regiments was already working on the corporate plan, and McKinsey was finalizing the turnaround program with Eskom, which envisaged Regiments as McKinsey's SDNL partner. Though my personal interaction with Regiments were limited at the time, I understood that many consultants then at Regiments would move over to Trillion with Dr. Wood and conduct the same management consulting business under the Trillion corporate name. And what I wish to draw to your attention, and I think I must have done so previously, is that sentence which he says, at that time, Regiments was already working on the corporate plan, and McKinsey was finalizing the turnaround program. I am going to read again, or further, from the affidavit of Mr. Amankwa. And I want to read a paragraph where he makes concluding remarks after several paragraphs in his affidavit. So let's go to page, and I'll give you a chance to comment after that because the theme is the same. Page 702.
Sorry, just repeat that, 7?
Yeah, 702.221.
0.221.
Yes. Now, just for context,
Remember to just tell us, Mr. Solega, whose affidavit you are referring to at 702.21.
Yes, the affidavit that we read, that we have just come from now,
Dr. Weiss,
is Dr. Vass's affidavit.
or this one is still his?
This one now is one of Mr. Amankwa, chairperson.
Okay.
Safradu Yeboah Amankwa.
Okay.
It starts on page 702.174.
Okay, you can continue.
We read certain excerpts from this affidavit previously. And I have said page 702.221. Just by way of context, Mr. Singh, what Mr. Amankwa deals with start on the page 702.220. And it's under the heading 9 February 2016 letter. And he has his chairperson on page 702.220.
Not actually, but I did hear that. I'm checking something else, but
Okay.
you can continue. I've got 220.
Yes. Mr. Singh, let's start on point 220. Paragraph 20.18.
So we're going to 220.
Yeah.
Okay.
Paragraph 20.18. So he says, by way of summary, and in light of what has been stated above, I draw attention to the following features of the relationship between McKinsey and Trillion. One, he says, McKinsey entered into discussions with Trillion in order to explore the possibility of working with Trillion as a supplier development partner at Eskom. Those discussions were terminated in March 2016 when Trillion failed to satisfy McKinsey's due diligence requirements. Sub 2, McKinsey never entered into a subcontract or any other contractual relationship with Trillion, whether for the corporate plan project or the turnaround program. Trillion has never been a subcontractor to McKinsey. And then he mentions other points.
Well, they are important. Number 3 says McKinsey never paid money to Trillion.
Yes.
And says 4, McKinsey never authorized payment to Trillion by Eskom. 5, any payments that were made by Eskom to Trillion occurred after McKinsey had informed Eskom of the fact that Trillion had failed its due diligence requirements. 6, McKinsey has found no evidence to suggest that any of its personnel were involved in corrupt activities with employees of Trillion. I just thought 3, 4, and 5 appear to be quite important in the light of the issues.
Yes, no, the chairperson is correct. Those aspects are important. And then Mr. Singh, in regard to this letter of the 9th of February 2016, which relates to the direct payment to Trillion of 30.6 million, let's read on the next page. It says, paragraph 21.1, on 9 February 2016, Mr. Vikas Sagar transmitted a letter to Mr. Prish Govender of Eskom, and he references the annexure, MCK 65. The letter related to the professional services contract, that is the corporate plan. The letter recorded that McKinsey has subcontracted a portion of the services to be performed under the agreement to Trillion Proprietary Limited. It authorized Eskom to make payments directly to Trillion, but only if McKinsey confirmed in writing that it was satisfied with the relevant services performed by Trillion and that the amount of the invoice was correct. 2 conditions that were never met. Then the next paragraph, 21.2, says Trillion was never McKinsey's subcontractor under the corporate plan, because the assertion in the letter that McKinsey had subcontracted to Trillion was wrong. This letter has engendered significant confusion. While it was expected at the time that Trillion would be McKinsey's supply development partner on the turnaround program, which Mr. Singh aired, which would have been administered under the MSA, as explained elsewhere in my statement, McKinsey had not yet entered into a subcontract with Trillion and would indeed, in the weeks following the letter, decide not to do so. And please turn to page 702.
Well, Mr. Selega, be careful not to have a situation where you have read to Mr. Singh a number of things,
yes,
and when you ask him to comment, he can't remember a lot of things. So I think you need to break it into manageable portions.
Components, yeah. That's all right, Chair. It's just that the paragraphs I wanted to read all deal with the same theme.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay,
they all
that's
deal with
fine.
the same theme.
Okay, all right.
I will give him a chance just to respond to these ones before I go to the next ones. Mr. Singh, lastly, turn to page 702, 2.224. 224. Yes. 224, paragraph 21.7. He says, in sum, McKinsey regrets that the 9 February letter contained inaccuracies, which generated confusion and misunderstanding. All of the people who had involvement in the creation of the letter have been disciplined or have left the firm. But the notion that the 9 February letter can be taken to confirm that Trillian was actually McKinsey's subcontractor is wrong. This has been thoroughly investigated and cannot be reconciled with contemporaneous information. Such evidence makes clear that Trillian was not McKinsey's subcontractor, was still undergoing the due diligence process, and never became McKinsey's subcontractor. I can read further, but I suppose you get the point of what the two gentlemen are making in regard to the corporate plan. So what emerges from here is that in respect of the corporate plan, McKinsey was not, Trillian was not just not, but never McKinsey's subcontractor in respect of the corporate plan. We can deal with that first, or you can even address it in respect of the MSA, which is the turnaround program, in respect of which they also, or he also says, Trillian was never the subcontractor to McKinsey because of failing to pass the test on the due diligence. But let's first deal with the corporate plan.
And as you prepare to do that, Mr. Singh, I just want you to be aware that last time, and I think the occasion before last time, we dealt with the issue of whether it was regiments who had a subcontract with McKinsey or Trillian, or both, and the question of who rendered the services, was it Trillian or regiments, and the question of whether Eskom should have paid Trillian directly. So I don't want us to repeat the same thing, but I do believe that Mr. Slega, it was right to draw your attention to the portions of affidavits that he has done so. So as you respond, just bear in mind that I know what you have, what your version was that you have said before. Mm-hmm. If you don't intend changing it, then you just want to add or clarify, it's enough. You don't need to go into details about it again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, just from my side, just an apology for the delay that we had caused this morning.
Yes.
But at least I'm of the view that the information that was provided this morning would eventually,
yes,
in time,
yes,
reduce the amount of time we'd have to spend on this.
No, that's fine. Your counsel did explain to me in chambers. It's just that the way it happened wasn't good. But as I've said, your counsel has explained everything to me. And
thank you for your indulgence and understanding, sir. Mr. Chair, just a couple of points before we go into the responses. Firstly, in terms of Dr. Weiss's affidavit, Mr. Chair, I would like to place on record that the paragraphs that I'm asked to respond to did not form part of the 3-3 notice that we received.
Not form
part of the 3-3 notices that we received
so?
Relating to Mr. Weiss's statement, because we received a redacted version of that statement.
Is that so?
Right.
But have you had a chance to read them subsequent to the 3-3 notice that did not include them, or you have not had a chance to read them?
Well, we haven't received the unredacted version, I think, as of now. But obviously we've read it now through Mr. Seleka's passage.
Oh, so your only chance to look at them was now?
Was now. We did have, or I certainly had occasion to read Dr. Weiss's transcripts, however, relating to his evidence. And second,
Chairperson, sorry to interrupt. Maybe just to place on record that we have in writing quite a long time ago requested the unredacted versions of both Dr. Weiss and Fine's affidavits. As I think in my client's response to what we were given, he makes it quite clear that he's only been given certain pages with certain paragraphs. And up to now, and I think I have approached my learned friend also on one of the occasions about it, but we've not yet received the unredacted versions.
Okay, no. Mr. Selega?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I know that we traversed this last time. Mr. Singh was given the affidavit through the money flow work stream because the evidence of Dr. Weiss was led by the money flow. So the request, I think, would have been addressed to that work stream. But the full affidavit of Dr. Weiss has been in the bundle. Mr. Singh has been given the bundle from the time, or prior to the time of his appearance. And we have asked him questions previously on 2 occasions relevant to that.
I do remember that there was a reference to an affidavit of Dr. Weiss. It's just that I don't know whether he has provided one affidavit or more than one, but I do recall that there was reference to at least an affidavit of Dr. Weiss. Yes. If you say to me this is the only affidavit, then it means it was this one.
It is this one, but what Mr. Singh and my learned friend are saying is that when they were given the affidavit the first time around last year, it was redacted.
By the money flows.
By the money flows.
Yeah.
It was redacted.
Yes.
But I've since explained to them, Chair, and even here in an open session, that witnesses are given affidavits to the extent that they are implicated. Mr. Singh has dealt with the affidavit in reply. He has a replying supplementary affidavit where he's expressly saying the affidavit of Dr. Weiss doesn't implicate him. So all we are doing from our point of view is to put Dr. Weiss's affidavit in the bundle for his benefit, and then we put the version of Dr. Weiss's to him.
But your real answer to the concern is that Dr. Weiss' affidavit, to which you have referred now, has been in the bundle that was given to Mr. Singh quite some time back.
Prior to his appearance.
Before his first appearance.
Before his appearance in the Eskom matters.
In the Eskom matters.
Yes.
Yes. Counsel for Mr. Singh, you accept that?
Accept that, Chairperson. I think what my client tried to explain and what we're trying to explain is that at the time when he responded, it was a partial response to a redacted version.
Yes.
So basically, he can't be faulted for only dealing with those specific paragraphs.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. As I understand it, Mr. Singh, the Dr. Weiss affidavit was included in the bundle that was given to you before you came to testify in the Eskom work stream last time, for the first time. And if that is so, it would seem that there has been enough time for you to familiarize yourself with it. And from what Mr. Selega says, it does look like you did look at it and you didn't think there was anything implicating you. And you may be right about that, but what Mr. Selega is doing is saying, here is something that might not implicate you in Dr. Weiss' affidavit, but which might be contrary to your version about Trillium. So that I think that's the point.
Mr. Chair, the point is taken. I think my additional comment regarding this is, Mr. Chair, if the issue relating to Dr. Weiss was going to be relevant to the discussion.
Relating to?
The affidavit of Dr. Weiss was relevant and was produced in the bundle. Mr. Seleka is correct in saying that the affidavit that we've been provided for before did not implicate. Yet we commented on the paragraphs that required comment. If it was as significant as what we are now saying, my question is, notwithstanding the fact that it did not implicate, we should have been given the opportunity to have commented on it in its entirety.
Well, but I'm told you said it doesn't implicate you.
On the redacted version, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Not
But
on
this one, as I understand it, which is not redacted, was part of the bundle that was given to you a long time ago.
Yes, Mr. Chair, but the comment around not being implicated relates to the unredacted
Okay, no,
version.
I understand that, yes.
And the similar point I have with Mr. Amankua,
Yes.
affidavit.
Yes,
Yes, it is now forming part of the bundle. We have access to it because
Yeah.
of Mr. Seleka
Yes.
has given it to us.
yes.
But again, if we were placing such reliance on this document, as we are now doing, then I would have at least expected that this would have been provided to us for us to provide an appropriate affidavit.
Yes. Well, but I think the bottom line is, as far as these particular paragraphs that Mr. Selega has referred you to, as I understand the position, they might not be implicating you. All he's doing is, you have given a certain version, and here is somebody else who might be talking, not having you in mind, but say something that might be contradicting what you want to say. In fairness, he wants to give you a chance to say, what do you say about Dr. Weiss, who says the following things?
No, I agree, Mr. Chair. I just
Yeah.
wanted to place on record
Yeah.
my reservations,
Yeah.
but I've done it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
in that light, we can continue.
No, that's fine, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to think the best way of dealing with this matter. Okay, it's fine. Let's deal with 692 first, relating to Dr. Weiss's comment.
You want us to go to what, page 220 or what
No,
page?
sorry, sir, 692.
692 first, yeah, okay. Yes, you may continue.
Mr. Chair, if we look at the paragraphs that have been referred to by Advocate Seleka, as he had mentioned, they relatively have one theme that runs throughout it, is that Dr. Weiss was of the view that at some point in time, there was regiments that were doing certain amounts of work, and there was then a period of time when there was a, let's call it, merger or acquisition type of initiative that was happening between regiments and Trillium.
A spin-off.
Or rather-
A spin-off merger.
Yeah,
Let's call it a buyout.
I think there would be a normal word for it. A breakaway.
Yes.
There was to be a breakaway from regiments.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I think I certainly do not deny that, but what I want to raise in terms of the issue relating to whether Mr. Weiss has concretely concluded that Trillium or regiments had done the corporate plan work. If you have reference to his transcripts, which I've said I've read, and we can probably go to the relevant paragraph. When he was posed the question, okay, he did not definitively answer the question. He basically said there were emails, there was training, there were people, there were meetings, and regiments and Trillium people attended these meetings.
Regiments and Chilean people?
Attended these meetings,
Yeah.
were trained as such. Emails came from Trillium email addresses, they came from regiments' email addresses. So he could not conclusively conclude that Trillium had not done the work, from my recollection of his transcripts. And that is my response to the question relating to Dr. Weiss's comments.
But of course,
Mr. Chair, for now, if you allow me.
No, before you proceed,
Sure.
I just want to say, depending on whether you accept his evidence that Trillion never had a subcontract with McKinsey, your answer that you gave might not be so important.
Mr. Chair, I don't think the question whether Trillion had a subcontract with McKinsey was put to Dr. Weiss.
Yes, but he, in his affidavit, in the passages that Mr. Selega read earlier on, if I recall correctly, it's just that I was reading other passages that he might not have read as well, so I may be mistaken. But he does say somewhere that, no, actually in one of the passages that he read, where I even read more of the paragraphs, he does say that Trillion never had any contract with McKinsey. So I'm saying if you accept that, and I don't know if you do accept it, if you accept that, it may be that the fact that they may have certain people who were with regiments or Trillion attended meetings, the weight one attaches to that might be different if compared to a situation where there was a contract. So in other words, if the contract was only with regiments, whatever those personnel may have been doing, they may have been doing for regiments and not Trillion, if Trillion had no subcontract with McKinsey.
Mr. Chair, firstly, the passage that you're referring to comes from Mr. Amankua's affidavit.
Oh, okay, maybe,
not
yeah.
Dr.
Yes,
Weiss.
not Dr. Weiss, maybe.
And
yeah.
I will deal with that when we're dealing with Dr.
Okay,
Amankua's
that's
affidavit.
fine, that's fine.
But for now, my response relating to the paragraphs is that, from what I recall from Dr. Weiss's transcripts, is that he is not definitive on the question.
It's not definitive.
He was not definitive in terms of saying regiment's people did the work on the corporate plan. He was not. Okay? And I will come back to this point when I deal with the issue of Mr. Amankua's comments. In having to deal with Mr. Amankua's comments, I think, Mr. Chair, I would have to refer you back to one of my affidavits. I'm not too sure which one it is. It's the one that we respond to the corporate plan. It's the first.
You want your counsel to assist to remind you?
I know what it is.
Oh, okay.
Eskom Bundle 16, page 591.
590.
Are you referring to your affidavit starting at page 591 of Band 16, Mr. Singh?
Sorry, sir, I'm there. I'm just looking for the relevant
Okay,
paragraphs myself.
okay. Are you looking for a paragraph that says what, so we can assist you if we see it?
In terms of the STLN, I think I found it in paragraph 18.
The
Paragraph
MSA.
1.5.
You see, Mr. Chair, if you look at paragraph, so page 597, we deal with the point that I was just making, which states, Dr. Weiss in addition outlines how Trillion came to be an SDL partner instead of regiments. In summary, he outlines the following in this regard. Dr. Wood intended to start up his own black account in management consulting called Trillion. This would be achieved by buying out Regiment's Management Consulting Division. McKinsey communicated with both Trillian and Regiment staff. McKinsey trained staff that moved from regiments to Trillian. So, Mr. Chair, this is what I was talking about in terms of the fact that it was not actually definitive to say regiments did not do the work on the corporate plan, firstly.
Sorry, Mr. Singh. But he's talking about Trillian becoming an SDL partner of McKinsey instead of regiments. That is in regard to the turnaround program, the MSA. It's not the corporate plan.
Mr. Chair, we can check that, but my understanding and my recollection of the transcripts was that was in a response to a question as to whether he could say whether regiments or Trillian was actually the people that did the work on the corporate plan. Further, Mr. Chair, I would like to take you to the emails that relate to the 9th of February letter. Find it.
In fact, Mr. Singh, you have answered that question yourself in the paragraph, in the preceding paragraph on the page before, which specifically shows that his answer relates to the turnaround program and not the corporate plan.
Sorry, Mr. Select.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second. I'm just looking for something.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure where this is. Sorry,
You want to indicate what you are looking for?
I'm looking for the emails that relate to the 9th of February letter.
An email from who to who?
It's a string of emails, Mr. Chair, that culminated in the issuance of this 9th of...
That relate to the letter from McKinsey that talked about Trillian.
Trillian, yes.
Okay, Mr. Sleg, are you able to assist him? And his counsel can indicate if she's able to say where we find those emails.
I think it's in one of the affidavits. But while we're looking for that, Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, maybe I can just deal with...
or what we can do, we can deal with other matters and then later
I will deal with Mr. Amankua's
yes, okay.
responses to the
Okay.
while we try and
Okay.
find this. So we were looking at Mr. Amankua's issues relating to paragraph 2018.
Are you done with Dr. Weiss?
No, I'm saying
You'll come back.
I'll come back once we
Okay,
find the
all
emails,
right. That's fine.
if we indeed have them.
Mr. Selega?
Yeah. Mr. Singh, before you move on to Mr. Amankwa,
Yes.
I was saying to you in your affidavit, you referred the chairperson to page 597, and you read paragraph 18.
Yes.
And I was drawing to your attention that what Dr. Vice is talking about there is the proposal to have Trillion as an SDL partner of McKinsey in the turnaround program and not the corporate plan, because we are dealing with the corporate plan.
That is correct, sir.
Yes. And I'm saying the answer that gives credence to what I'm putting to you is evident from your quotation in the previous page, that he's specifically dealing with the turnaround program. You quote him from page 595, paragraph 17.
That is correct, sir.
And in summary, Dr. Vice states, and then you have all those paragraphs.
Yes, sir.
Regiments was actually quite capable internationally, and he talks about regiments. You turn the page, you go to the last paragraph on that page. He says, we have worked with them, that is regiments, before and even done the due diligence with them before. And this, you know, how, and we consider them also as potential supply development partner for Eskom turnaround program. Then you go on to say what you say in paragraph 18. And you are correct insofar as it is the turnaround program, because they did intend to replace regiments with Trillion as a subcontractor in respect of the turnaround program.
Mr. Chair, as I said, I will check these transcripts and come back. If indeed it is that, then we will obviously accept that. But
No,
for now,
that's fine.
I am saying the reason why I put this in is because of my distinct recollection that this was asked
No, that's fine.
as it relates to page 29 of his transcripts.
You'll have a chance to look
Yes.
at those emails and then come back.
Then Mr. Amankwa.
So, Mr. Chair, in terms of responding to Mr. Amankua's affidavit relating to paragraphs, on page 702.221, which is paragraph 20.18, 21.1, 21.2, and 21.7. Mr. Chair, in order for me to respond, I would need for the chairperson to actually go to paragraph 21.5.
We're back to 114, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What page?
Let me just get it for you, sir. Are we on, Mr. Chair, 702.221?
So just give us the reference again, Mr. Singh.
We're starting on 702.221, which is where you started, and you
Yeah.
quoted all of those paragraphs.
Oh, yes.
Right?
I've got it.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, in order for me to respond to those specific paragraphs and the issue that was put to me by Mr. Seleka, I would need for the chairperson to go to paragraphs 21.5, which is on page 702.221.
Yes, I am there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if you would allow me, I would read the following. This 9 February 2016 letter had been prepared at the request of Eskom
Yes,
and Trillion,
at the request of both.
at the request of both.
Yeah.
Okay?
And was the request in writing?
Well, Mr. Chair, that is
That's
from
what
the
will
emails.
be checked.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And Trillion, in order to streamline the process for Trillian to receive payments for work it had undertaken to that date in conjunction with the corporate project plan.
You are reading now from page 702.221, what paragraph?
Paragraph 21.5.
Or at 222, yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry, yes, 701, 702.222.
Yeah,
Paragraph 21.5.
yeah.
It says, let me start again, Mr. Chair. This 9 February 2016 letter had been prepared at the request of Eskom and Trillian in order to streamline the process for Trillian to receive payment for work it had undertaken up to that date in connection with the corporate plan project. Full stop. He then puts in brackets, this letter had nothing whatsoever to do with the turnaround program. This is clear from the content of the letter. Okay? So what it says to me, Mr. Chair, that this letter was not simply contemplated by somebody in McKinsey that made a mistake to issue this letter. Firstly. Secondly, he then goes off to state in paragraph 21.5, bracket 1.
Yeah.
Dr. Weiss, a McKinsey partner, and Mr. Sega consulted with McKinsey internal legal advisor regarding the form and content of the letter. As a result, certain internal communications are subject to attorney-client privilege and have not been reflected below. But what is important for me is that Dr. Weiss, whose affidavit we've just been through, is part of this process in preparing this letter.
And I'm not sure that Mr. Sadaga, an internal legal advisor, would give rise to an attorney-client privilege.
Well, that was the other point that counsel was going to raise, but
yeah, I mean,
but
the internal legal advisor is just an employee.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Yes, so they might have to produce those those communications that they didn't produce because they sought cover under attorney-client privilege.
And Mr. Chair, we would implore that we actually get them because we'd like to see what this was.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that must be pursued, Mr. Selega,
Yes,
if it
Chair.
hasn't been pursued, yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Singh.
Then on subparagraph 2, it says, on 26 January 2016.
I'm sorry. Just thinking about something with regard to my agency. No, but I think it's something to be dealt with outside of the hearing. Okay, all right, continue.
Mr. Chair, then 21.5, bracket 2. On 26 February 2016, Trillian, represented by Mr. Clive Angel and others copied, wrote to McKinsey, Dr. Weiss and Sega. So this is the emails that I'm trying to find, Mr. Chair, but obviously it's confirmed. Seeks assistance in receiving payment from Eskom. And he actually attaches the same emails that I'm trying to find. Mr. Angel asked McKinsey to write to Eskom on Trillian's behalf, seeking permission for McKinsey and Trillian to invoice Eskom separately under any contracts where Trillian is appointed supply development partner. Okay. And I concede it's any at this stage. On 8 February 2016, Sega emailed Dr. Weiss relating that Eskom had asked McKinsey to issue a letter stating that Trillian can invoice Eskom directly. And there's the email again. Mr. Vikas stated that he had received a request from Mr. Angel and asked Dr. Weiss whether he had also received the same request. In response, Dr. Weiss informed Sega that he had not received the request. But obviously that's contrary to the email. Bracket 4. On 9 February 2016, Sega, after consulting with McKinsey in-house counsel, sent the first draft of the proposed letter to Mr. Angel and Dr. Wood at Trillian. And there's the attached emails. Later today, SEGA sent the signed letter to Angel and Dr. Wood relating that this would be the letter they would be sending to Eskom. And then there's the letter. Then subparagraph, bracket 5. Shortly thereafter, SEGA also transmitted the letter to Prish Governor at Eskom. While the covering email discusses the MSA contract, the 9 February letter only relates to the fixed fee 6-month corporate plan for which work had largely been completed at the time of this letter. This is clear from the content of the letter. Eskom also confirmed that the 9 February letter related solely to the corporate plan and provided no authority whatsoever in respect of the turnaround program. Para 6. In addition, the letter transmitted to Eskom includes 2 important conditions that requires McKinsey to issue written confirmation that of our satisfaction of the relevant services performed by Trillian to McKinsey and to confirm the correctness of the amounts invoiced. None of these conditions were fulfilled. Again, bracket 7. Later on 9 February, Angel reverts to Trillian, proposed changes to the letter. And there's an email attached. These request changes from Trillian, including removing the conditions prescribed above, as they would introduce further administrative issues into the process because the letter only referred to the corporate plan contract. McKinsey did not adopt Trillian's proposed amendments. The correspondence further advises the parties' understanding at the time of 9 February letter submitted to Eskom related exclusively to the corporate plan project.
Yeah, evinces.
Evidences.
Yeah.
Never heard the words. So bracket 8. Mr. Clive Angel followed up Mr. Vikas's email noting that Trillian had invoiced Eskom. And under the conditions in the letter, McKinsey needs to write to Eskom to the effect that McKinsey was satisfied with the work Trillian had done on the corporate plan. Eskom never requested such a letter of satisfaction, and McKinsey never sent such confirmation. Eskom has confirmed that the 9 February did not in itself, basically, I would like to stop there, Mr. Chair, in terms of the question that was posed by, or the issue that was raised by Mr. Seleka, is that, Mr. Chair, I do not believe that if you read these passages, that it can be simply dismissed that this letter was an erroneous letter that just happened to be issued.
It seems to have been, before it was sent to Eskom, you say it seems that it was subjected to quite some detailed scrutiny within McKinsey and Trillian.
Mr. Chair, in terms of the email trail that I'm requesting to be provided, you will even see post the letter, the legal head of McKinsey follows up on the letter to suggest, is there anything further that has actually happened relating to this letter? He then escalates it to the head of the accounts department within McKinsey to say, please follow up on this matter and make sure it is dealt with. She then sends an email to Eskom, saying to Eskom, and this went to a lady called Marianne Hendricks, who I think is the PA of Mr. Prish Governor, who was the project manager on this project, to state that should you have any issues relating to this matter further, please bring it to my attention within McKinsey, so I can elevate it to the appropriate leadership level within the company to ensure that these things are streamlined. Now, Mr. Chair, taking all of that into account, I do not understand how McKinsey basically says that this letter was prepared on the basis that it was incorrect and stand away from it. Mr. Chair, this brings me to another point that I'd like to make to the Commission, for the Commission to take note of. Mr. Chair, these documents, this letter, 9 February letter, is a letter that has been issued by McKinsey signed by a partner of McKinsey, received by Eskom. Now, Mr. Chair, when Eskom receives this letter, in what mind does Eskom receive it? It receives it in good faith that McKinsey has issued this letter. What does Eskom do with it? Eskom places reliance on it, that this letter was received in good faith. Now, for whatever reason, McKinsey decides to sidestep this letter and say, no, we didn't issue it, or it was invalid, or for the fact that these two clauses in the agreement was not fulfilled by Eskom, therefore it's invalid. Park for 1 minute, Mr. Chair, the fact that the letter may have in Eskom been used for other purposes. But for now, the purpose that we're using the letter is to understand whether McKinsey at any point in time contemplated Trillion to be their SDLN partner. And from what I have read to you, Mr. Chair, I cannot find it in my being to suggest that they were not. So McKinsey can say and do whatever they want, but on objective fact that I've just read to you, in Mr. Amankwa's affidavit himself, would suggest that they at all material times believed that Trillion should have been paid for the work that they did on the corporate plan.
Yes.
Yeah, just talking about Eskom receiving it in good faith, Mr. Singh, just remember that he says this was a letter at the request, prepared at the request of Eskom and Trillion.
Yes, sir. That is my point. Mr. Chair, again, if we look at it.
But let me just finish. So it's not as if the letter comes unexpected to Eskom, and Eskom simply, oh, it comes from McKinsey, we will act on the letter in good faith. It was specifically Eskom and Trillion who requested the letter to be prepared, according to Mr. Amankwa.
Mr. Chair, again, McKinsey is a world-renowned company. They are a global company. If they receive a request from Mr. Singh, and Mr. Singh says to them, listen, I want this letter. Or it comes from Mr. Molefe, or it comes from Mr. Governor, or it comes from whoever in Eskom. And it purports to request McKinsey to not factually represent the state of affairs that McKinsey knows. Why would McKinsey issue the letter? Or why would McKinsey have to issue the letter? And that is where I'm saying, if I request something in good faith, I expect the reciprocation in good faith. And therefore, we rely on letters, or we rely on assertions, or we rely on representation, or we rely on warrants that are made in good faith.
Well, speaking generally, there ought to be no problem with placing reliance on a letter that genuinely comes from McKinsey. But two things that I want to clarify. One, as I recall that letter, it did not specify certain conditions, which, as I recall from last time we were dealing with that letter, would have had to have been met before any payment could have been made to Trillion, and where they met.
Mr. Chair.
Chairperson, I think the letter that we're speaking about is AS19.
Yes.
To my client's affidavit.
Yes.
So I'm going to leave it there because I've got a further issue with the interpretation that's attached to the letter. But I'm going to let my client deal with it.
Yes.
And if necessary, I will bring it to your attention.
Yes,
Thank
no,
you
no,
very
that's
much.
fine. Which bundle, what page is the letter, if you are able to?
It is also in...
Sorry, it's AS7. My attorney just corrected me.
Yes, it helps
And
if we know the bundle.
Eskom 16-697. It's in
Okay.
the black.
Okay, all right.
It is also contained, Chairperson, in Eskom Bundle 14.
I think my registrar already has bundle 16. 16, is that correct?
No, 14.
If it does appear there as council indicated, then we can use that one.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I've got the letter at Eskom Bundle 16, page 697. It's a letter from McKinsey and Company, and it's addressed to Prish Governor at Eskom. Just to refresh everybody's mind, it says, Dear Prish, authorization to pay subcontractor directly. That's the subject or heading. We refer to the professional services contract for the provision of consulting services for 6 months entered into between Eskom SOC Limited, Eskom, and McKinsey and Company Africa Proprietary Limited, McKinsey, dated 29 September 2015, the agreement. As you know, McKinsey has subcontracted a portion of the services to be performed under the agreement to Trillion Proprietary Limited, Trillion. So in this letter, they make it clear in the second sentence that McKinsey had subcontracted a portion of the services to be performed under the agreement to Trillion. And then it says in the second paragraph, subject to 1, the terms of the agreement relating to any payments to be made by Eskom to us, and 2, us issuing a written confirmation of our satisfaction with the relevant services to be performed by Trillion to McKinsey, and 3, the correctness of the amount to be invoiced. We hereby agree for and authorize Trillion to invoice and be paid directly by Eskom for any services performed by it in pursuance of our obligations under this agreement. Okay. So, would you agree, Mr. Singh, that on the face of it, in that letter, second paragraph, Ms. McKinsey's agreement and authorization that Trillion be paid directly by Eskom was subject to those 3 conditions? Do you go along with that understanding of paragraph 2?
Mr. Chair, I do, on the basis that it is forming part of the letter.
Yes, okay, all right. And then the next question would be, when Eskom made the payment to Trillion, had these conditions been satisfied?
Mr. Chair, I think before we go and answer that question, let us deal with the issue that Mr. Seleka had posed to me, relating to the identity of the party that performed the services.
Yes, okay, deal with that and then come to this.
And I'm saying, given the content of this letter, in terms of sentences 1 and 2 of paragraph 1, it is clear that for all intents and purposes and at all material time, McKinsey understood that Trillion had been doing the work and there was a subcontract, they were a subcontractor to them.
I don't think that you necessarily need to misrepresent anything, but when you say at all material times, that might widen.
Okay. All right. So at the date of this letter, Chair, it would appear, not it would appear, it is factual that based on the paragraphs that I've read to you from Mr. Amankwa's letter, Mr. Amankwa's affidavit, as well as which results in this letter, of 9 February, it is that McKinsey accepted that Trillion would be their subcontractor on the corporate plan work.
Let me mention this, and then you can see how you deal with it. That last sentence in the first paragraph of the letter suggests two things. One, that McKinsey, at the time of the writing of this letter, had already subcontracted a portion of the services to Trillion. That's one. But two, but that the services were yet to be performed under the agreement. That might be a certain interpretation. Maybe somebody else might interpret that sentence differently. But my first impression was, it looks like they are saying, we have already subcontracted to Trillion, but that's for services to be performed in the future. But maybe what they meant is, at the time of subcontracting, the services were to be performed, but maybe they had already been performed by the 9th, I'm not sure. So I just want you to deal with those things.
Mr. Chair, I would hesitate to say it's your second interpretation, and I will tell you why I say so. Firstly, they reference the agreement, which can only be the corporate plan agreement, because they actually define it in the first sentence. Okay? And secondly, Mr. Amankua, in the passages that I've read to you, states that the date on which this letter was prepared in the process that I had taken you through, by that time, the work relating to the corporate plan had substantially been completed.
Okay.
If you recall,
Okay.
the corporate plan would have needed to be submitted by the 28th of February.
Yes, yes.
And this is around the 9th. So substantial completion was achieved by that time.
Okay, okay. Yes. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Mr. Seleka?
Yes, Chair, the chairperson's question about the conditions should not be
Oh, yes.
forgotten.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So hopefully, Mr. Chair, this puts paid to the issue of whether the identity of the party relating to the corporate plan is still a mystery or not. In my view, it should not. In terms,
we will put everything into the
One
basket,
pot. Yeah.
into the pot, and
Yeah.
see what we come out with. Yeah.
Yeah, because, Mr. Singh, we can't turn a blind eye to the correction they make, that the information was inaccurate. And the people who drafted the letter have since been disciplined or have left the firm.
well, Mr. Chair, the fact that the people,
Maybe let's not go back to it.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at this, that everything must be put into the pot to see what the real picture is. What you have said, the passages that you read in the affidavit, and what Mr. Slega referred to, everything will be looked at to see exactly what picture emerges.
yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
I think, again, Mr. Chair, not going back to the issue,
yeah,
but the fact that someone has been disciplined or someone has left the organization does not detract from the fact that this is a legitimate letter.
yeah. No, I understand what you say. I understand what you're saying.
Coming back to the issue of Mr.
The
Chair,
conditions.
the conditions. Mr. Chair, as I understand it, once Mr. Angel, once this letter was transmitted to
Eskom.
to Eskom and to Trillion, and after Mr. Angel's subsequent amendments to the letter was rejected, Trillion's CFO, Mr. Labalo, issued a letter or an email to McKinsey requesting this sign-off in terms of these procedures. And I think the email had been sent to Mr. Lawrence Youngling, a McKinsey manager or senior partner. And he then, in the email, basically said the sign-off should be sent to Mr. Edwin Mabalani. In terms of whether the sign-off was actually provided or not, I'm not too sure, but I know that a request had been made. In my affidavit, I do go to the extent of saying that Mr. Governor also engaged with Mr. Lawrence to understand whether this is approved by McKinsey or not. I don't have an email to prove that Mr. Lawrence had given the go-ahead, but maybe when Mr. Governor is requested for an affidavit, or when Mr. Governor appears, he can be asked, and Mr. Edwin Mabalani can also be asked in terms of what was the status of these conditions being fulfilled or not.
So your short answer is you have no personal knowledge whether or not these conditions were had been complied with by the time Eskom paid the money to Chilean.
No, sir.
Yeah.
Other than the documents that
No,
I
in
provided.
this case, meaning yes to my question. I said,
No, I did not.
Is your short answer that you have no personal knowledge of whether these conditions had been met by the time
Yes.
Eskom paid?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's yes. Yeah, no and yes can confuse. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Mr. Salega?
Thank you, Chair. Just for the benefit of the chairperson, Mr. Singh, in the same affidavit of Mr. Amankwa, and I will not read this, Chair, unless when you look at them, you find them crucial.
Yeah, well, if you think it's important, you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's look at paragraph 7, Eskom Bundle 14. Eskom Bundle 14, page 702.191.
191.
Yeah, 191. It's just,
Take it that we won't be going back to this letter of the 9th anytime
No,
soon. So this
we can put aside.
can go. 702.191.
191, correct, Chair. Paragraph 7. And I'm concluding on this because
Yes.
remember Mr. Amankwa said the information in the letter is inaccurate because they didn't subcontract to Trillion, and to say otherwise would contradict information that existed at the time in that last paragraph we read. And he deals with that in...
Sorry, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Can you just
Okay.
repeat?
He says in paragraph 21.7,
21.7.
yeah,
I'm sorry. You have moved from page 702.191 now.
yes, Chair, I thought... Sorry, Mr. Singh, what did you want? Let me ask you, what did you want?
No, you started speaking and I wasn't just listening.
Oh,
So I just said if you could just
just
what you've said.
repeat, yes, okay. But you are on page...
You referred us to page 702.191.
That's
Mr.
right,
Salega,
yeah.
Paragraph 7.
Yes.
Yeah, what was the point about paragraph 7?
So before I read it, I want to underscore the paragraphs here by what Mr. Amankwa says,
So which are those paragraphs?
which is what he said in paragraph 21.7.
21.
Yes.
So that's what I was looking for. Okay.
Yeah, tell us what he says there, Mr. Salega.
Is where he says, it is inaccurate to say Trillion had been subcontracted in the corporate plan as McKinsey subcontract. To say otherwise is not reconcilable with contemporaneous information. Yes. So that's the underscore. Then I go to this paragraph. You hear, Mr. Singh?
Yes. Okay, go to paragraph 7 then.
Then paragraph 7 deals with Regiment's role in the corporate plan projects, and there he deals with it. He says, 7.1, McKinsey was notified late in the contracting process in Eskom's acceptance letter of 29 September 2015 that McKinsey would need to outsource 30% of the corporate plan contract to a SDP, which is Supplier Development Partner. 7.2, at this time, Regiment's Capital, Regiment in bracket, a firm that had previously performed work at Eskom on a financial strategy, was viewed as a logical candidate to partner for the corporate plan. Regiment's prior track record at Eskom and his prior work with McKinsey positioned it to make an important contribution to the corporate plan. Then 7.3, in the end, however, there was no formalized relationship in the form of a contract with Regiment for work at Eskom on the corporate plan. Regiment reported directly to Eskom on its work, and McKinsey and Regiment largely worked on separate work streams, although McKinsey's consultants collaborated with Regiment on select issues. 7.4, Regiment worked on the financial part of the corporate plan that formed the funding plan chapter, which was work that was directly overseen by Eskom. And then he refers to the annexures. This was an extension of the financial modeling work that Regiment had worked on for Eskom on what I understand was on a pro bono basis. 7.5, McKinsey's decision to proceed with the corporate plan without a formal contract in place with a supplier development partner is an example of a mistake that should not have been made. Mr. Singh, I can read the entire paragraph. While it appears to have stemmed principally from the fact that Regiment was already working at Eskom on related work streams and was in the process of spinning off its consulting business, it is nevertheless regrettable. Although Regiment's work on the corporate plan was overseen by Eskom, the ambiguity surrounding the relationship between McKinsey and Regiments with respect to the corporate plan led to confusion among McKinsey team and allowed Regiments to undertake its work with less supervision from McKinsey that it might have received otherwise. This lack of contractual rigor is an example of the type of mistake McKinsey has sought to remedy with updates to its policies described below. But I've read this to you, Mr. Singh, to show that nowhere in these paragraphs he refers to Trillion, and he's explicit about who was intended to be the SDP, Supplier Development Partner, for McKinsey in respect of the corporate plan. And that is Regiment.
Do you want to say anything, Mr. Singh?
Indeed, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, in terms of the passages that is read by Mr. Saleka, firstly, I would like to point out 7.1. It is disingenuous of Mr. Amankwa to say that McKinsey was notified late in the contracting process, that Eskom would require an SD partner for work being performed at Eskom. This is not the first piece of work that McKinsey was doing at Eskom. So they know that there's always an SDL portion relating to McKinsey work. I mean, work at a state-owned company like Eskom. In terms of late, Mr. Chair, he signed, Dr. Weiss signed the letter of acceptance for the work, I think, on the 29th of September 2015, which indicated a 30% SDL partner. So before that date, they could have not known that they were going to get this work because it was not approved. So how would we have told them before that? So it couldn't have been late in the process. The letter that he signed acknowledged that 30% had to be some contract to an SDL partner. So that cannot be an acceptable statement that he made. In terms of the rest of the paragraphs that Mr. Seleka has read, Mr. Chair, again, if you look at paragraph 7.5, for example, McKinsey's decision to proceed with the corporate plan without a formal contract in place with a supplier development partner, doesn't say regiments, says a supplier development partner, is example of the mistake that should not have been made. Continues to the last sentence of this paragraph. The lack of contractual rigor is an example of the type of mistake McKinsey has sought to remedy with the updates to its policies described below. Now, Mr. Amankoa and McKinsey specifically try and obfuscate the obligation relating to the fact that they had a relationship with Trillium. Originally with regiments, and it morphed into Trillium. And for whatever reason that currently is playing out, whether it be political or reputational or otherwise, they are attempting to obfuscate the actual facts that were available at the time. And I will come back to paragraph 21.7, Mr. Chair, because it's now very convenient to say, although regiments worked on the corporate plan and was overseen by Eskom, the ambiguity surrounding the relationship between McKinsey and regiments with respect to the corporate plan led to confusion amongst McKinsey staff and allowed regiments to undertake work with less supervision. Mr. Chair, I can understand if my kids were confused. This is the legal head of McKinsey South Africa. It is the head of the accounts department. 2 senior partners from McKinsey are involved in the process. Dr. Weiss has 2 PhDs, not 1, 2. Now you're trying to tell me that these individuals that were part of the process, that was involved on a daily basis, that met me almost on a daily basis, were involved in meetings relating to all of these projects, were all of a sudden confused and had ambiguity in their mind. To produce a formal letter that went through the rigor of the process I just explained to you. And now McKinsey is of the view that it was ambiguous. I cannot reconcile the two, Mr. Chair. If we go back to 21.7, which is on page 702.224, Mr. Chair, such evidence makes it clear that Trillium was not McKinsey's subcontractor, because it was not contemporaneous with the information that existed at the time. Mr. Chair, I took you through the information that existed at the time. It is just convenient for McKinsey to now state that it was regiments that was doing the work at the time. There is no ambiguity, in my view. And I do not believe that McKinsey can claim ambiguity. If anything, Mr. Chair, if you look at the process that letter went through for it to be issued, and if McKinsey distances itself from that letter now, we should be asking the question, who actually committed the fraud?
Well, Mr. Seleka, there may be different points that need to be looked into with regard to the corporate plan, Trillium, regiments, McKinsey, Eskom, and the payment that was made. But on the face of it, if McKinsey gave Eskom a letter that said, you may pay our subcontractor Trillium directly, on the face of it, Trillium can't say Eskom should not have paid, except insofar as they say, we did say Eskom could pay Trillium directly, but we said if certain conditions were met, and Eskom was not supposed to pay Trillion directly if those conditions were not met. So that the latter point, I understand.
Yes, Chair.
So I think that to the extent that there may be the question of, to the extent that the letter of 9 February may be seen as relevant to the question whether Eskom should have paid Trillion directly, even assuming Trillion was McKinsey's subcontractor. The real question, it seems to me, would be whether Eskom ensured that the conditions that McKinsey said should be met before Eskom could pay Trillion directly were met. So that's how I see it.
Yeah.
If there are other points, one can take it from there. You have indicated that you don't have personal knowledge of whether those conditions were met or not by the time Eskom made the payment. Maybe somebody else should tell us whether they were met.
Chair, if I may, before we take the lunch adjournment,
Yeah.
I think, Mr. Singh, to add to what the chairperson is saying, the other factor I think, Chair, to be looked at is the fact that the letter doesn't appear to have come voluntarily from McKinsey. In the sense of it didn't come without a prior request. It came on the basis of a prior request from Eskom and Trillion. And you may want to answer the question, Mr. Singh, why did Eskom make that request to McKinsey? But you, yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would just ask Mr. Seleka to repeat the question.
The question is, you made the point earlier when you gave the background or the context of the letter of the 9th, that Eskom and Trillion asked McKinsey to provide the letter, as I recall what you said. And Mr. Seleka's question is, why did Eskom ask for the letter?
Mr. Chair, I was not the guy, I was not the person that requested the letter, but I would assume that the letter was requested, as Trillion has indicated, that Eskom required confirmation that the main contractor was happy that the subcontractor would be paid directly in terms of the content of the letter. And if you look at the emails that were attached to it and Mr. Amankwa's confirmation, that could only be the reason for the letter.
Yes, well, Mr. Seleka, you can look at it and then pursue what you believe needs to be pursued. On the face of it, I would imagine that if Eskom did not have a contract with Trillion, and Trillion was supposed to be McKinsey's subcontractor, Trillion should look to McKinsey for payment and not to Eskom. And if Trillion approached Eskom to say, please pay us directly, Eskom, if it was thinking about agreeing to that request, would have been acting prudently, to say the least. Let us see whether McKinsey, with whom we have a contract, has any problem with that, in which case we would like to have something in writing. So when one looks at it in that way, one can understand, but it may well be, and you would know better, it may well be that there are other issues that you want to explore in relation to the request. So I just mentioned that.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, but we should take the lunch adjournment now.
Yes.
I just want to say I'm keen for us to move away from the corporate plan.
Yes.
We have already spent a lot of time last time on it. But obviously, if there are passages in affidavits that are important or documents and so on, it may be important that at least we place on record which documents or which paragraphs in which affidavits I must have regard to when I come to deal with this matter, so that I can go to those documents, go to those passages when I consider the matter.
Yes.
So I'm just saying I'm keen that we move away to go and deal with other matters. But if when we come back, somebody feels strongly that there is something that needs to be mentioned other than saying, Chairperson, when you deal with this matter, please remember to look at that paragraph and that affidavit and that document, then let me know. Otherwise, in the afternoon, we could just do that exercise and move on to something else.
Indeed.
Okay, all right.
Thank
We will adjourn now. It's 1:10. We'll resume at 2:10.
Thank you.
We adjourn.